In April of 2026, Anna Delvey posted a video to her 1.1 million Instagram followers. She was putting on designer tights over her ankle monitor, ankle bracelet, ankle monitor, actually. The legal symbol of her conviction for stealing approximately $275,000 from banks, hotels, and personal acquaintances was now a styling challenge. The ankle monitor had become content. Her Instagram bio describes her as an unproblematic comedian. Take that in slowly. I had to. A woman convicted of multiple counts of grand larceny, calling herself unproblematic. But this is not a joke. It is the most clinically revealing self-description in contemporary public life. And the question this video answers is not how Anna Delvey did what she did. That story's been told a million times. The question is why 1.1 million people are still watching her perform the identity she went to prison for constructing, and what that says about the culture that made her possible, including the culture that you and I are living inside right now. Hey there, lovely people. Thanks for watching from wherever you are today. Quick favor before we get going, tap that like button, say hi in the comments, and of course, there is a reason that you cannot stop watching Anna Delvey. And it's not the reason you think it is. It's not the designer clothes. It's not the spa treatments. It's not the audacity. Not the spectacle of someone getting away with something extraordinary until they didn't. What it is the unbearable recognition that the line between her and you is thinner, I'm going to use that word if you've seen her Instagram, than you have ever allowed yourself to admit. She wanted what you want. She used the strategy that you've been maybe underlyingly, quietly been considering. And she only failed at the point where you still have the, I'm going to say discipline, but I'm also going to say ethical discipline to stop. This video is about why that recognition is still, to this day, keeping her famous. Now, before we go deeper, let me just explain who I am and why I'm the person to bring this to you. I analyze hidden dynamics in high-stakes groups and workplaces. And this is unique because I apply forensic psychology, neuroscience, group dynamics. These are my specialties, and I use them as my lens. And what I find in the most famous cases in history maps directly into the toxic workplace dynamics, the bullying, the harassment, the silencing of dissent, the micromanaging, the construction of false realities, the construction of false identities that my clients bring to me every single week. I have spent decades in clinical rooms with people who've lived inside of these systems built on the same psychological architecture Anna Delvey constructed around herself. Not at her scale, of course, not Marrakesh or Vanity Fair or the Anna Delvey Foundation at stake scale, but with the same core mechanism. The performance of an identity that bore no relationship to reality. Sustained through systemic exploration of other people's very specific psychological vulnerabilities. The Anna Delvey story has been told as another fraud story, as a true crime spectacle, as the rise and fall of a young woman who fooled the wealthy. But what has not been told is the wound architecture beneath it. You know, I always look at the wounds because that's interesting to me. The reason her three primary marks, Neff Davis, DeLoache Williams, I hope I said that right, and Kacy Duke, were chosen with precision. The reason all three of them stayed longer than any rational professional, because they were all professionals, should have stayed. And the reason that Anna Delvey is more famous now than she's ever been, despite being a convicted criminal whose actual achievements amount to nothing. That is what the forensic deep dive is for today. Everything that I'm about to show you about Anna Delvey, the wound architecture, the psychological mirror mechanism, the way she diagnosed every woman's specific hunger and then reflected it back at them. I see versions of it every single week in the workplaces that my clients come from. Different scale, of course, but same wound driving the exact same patterns. So I've put together an interactive toxic workplace recovery kit. It's just been turned interactive. It's like a little app. It's brilliant. It's free. And this breaks down exactly how these dynamics operate and what to do when you're inside them. So it helps you in the evenings and weekends sort of recover your nervous system so that you prepare yourself for the week. And it's linked in the description. Anna Sorokin was born on the 23rd of January, 1991, in a working-class satellite town south of Moscow. Now, this has been documented in many places, and if you want to see my sources, drop me a line and I'm happy to share them. Her father, Vadim, drove a truck, so he later became an executive at a transport company until that company went bankrupt in 2013, after which he started a small business focused on heating and cooling systems. Her mother was a stay-at-home parent. Now, this is the part that I find interesting, and I wish it would come up more often in the cases I'm choosing. I'll be looking for it, but there is no documented trauma in Anna Sorokin's childhood. No abuse documented, no neglect as such, no catastrophic family event, no traumatic loss. The public record contains none of the standard architectural features that we would expect psychologically to find when we are looking at early life, especially of someone who go on to commit very serious crimes. So this is very interesting to me. And for me, this is the most important clinical observation in me making the video, because I want you to hold on to that just for the next few minutes as we go through this video, because the absence of trauma is not a problem for the analysis. It is the analysis. Our culture has a very specific expectation about how to understand people who do bad things. We want a backstory. We want to see abuse or hear about something. We want to hear about neglect. We're looking for a moment that we can point to and say, that's where it started, or that's what made her capable of this. That expectation is not random. It comes from a deep human need to believe that ordinary people would not do what extraordinary perpetrators do. The trauma backstory protects us. It tells us that if we've been protected from what they were not protected from, we would have been, good. We would have remained good. We would have been protected from that. But Anna disrupts that protection because Anna Sorokin's wound is not abuse. As far as we know, Anna Sorokin's wound is something far more common and far more contemporary. It is the agonizing recognition that you are ordinary in a culture that has decided that ordinariness is a kind of failure. In clinical literature, there's a specific term for this particular psychological configuration. It's narcissistic solipsism. And the wound is not what was done to you. The wound is what you discover about yourself when you look in the mirror and find no evidence of the exceptionalism the culture's trained you to require. If you've got no obvious talent, it stands out. Anna was a working-class Russian girl whose father drove a lorry. The cultural environment that she would soon enter through the internet had decided that this was insufficient. This would not do. That a person whose origin story sounded like that did not deserve a seat at the table. That a person who could not perform a more compelling biography would be invisible. She was 16 years old when she made the decision that would define every subsequent year of her life. She would not be invisible. Now, there are multiple biographical sources that confirm that Anna moved at the age of 16, which was in 2007. And I want you to understand what this move did to her nervous system, because the developmental neuroscience matters enormously for this and everything else that follows. 16 is a critical window in adolescent identity development. If you look back when you were 16, were you defiant? Were you argumentative? How were you? What were you like? It's the period when peer relationships do the heavy lifting of identity formation. And this is a really good thing, actually. So when the social context of school, friends, romantic relationships, cultural participation, your groups, all of the groups and clubs. So all of these are doing the work of helping the brain build a coherent sense of self that eventually integrates the past with an emerging future. And cultural displacement during this window of time is not a minor inconvenience. It is a significant developmental disruption. So Anna arrived in Germany without speaking German. She enrolled at a Catholic school. Her classmates described her as quiet, isolated, and struggling with the language. That must have been very difficult. At 16, this is the point where you want people to know who you are. I cannot imagine what she would have been going through there. How do you form your bonds there when you don't speak the language? In neurobiological terms, what happened to Anna's nervous system at this point is what we would call a dorsal vagal freeze response. And I talk about the trauma responses. So when the brain interrupts prolonged social isolation as a survival threat, and the adolescent brain interrupts exactly that way, it drops into a low energy state, withdrawal. You become detached, isolated, withdrawn. Observing from the sidelines rather than participating in the world would feel safer. This is not depression as such in clinical terms, but it's a more primitive nervous system response to an environment that the brain has registered as fundamentally inhospitable. So Anna spent her adolescence in that state. And during that prolonged shutdown, anything prolonged would have a lasting effect. So when the normal mechanisms of identity development were essentially offline, she discovered the internet. In the late 2000s, the platforms that captured Anna's attention were not the platforms that most people now associate with the early social internet. So they were not Tumblr. They were not Facebook in its first phase. They were specifically Vogue magazine. Fashion blogs were huge, and image accounts on LiveJournal and Flickr. The thing is, that distinction matters more than it might appear to matter. And I'll tell you why, because LiveJournal was a text and image-based platform where users curated identities through written posts and aesthetic image collections. It's today's Instagram, really. Flickr was image first, a photographer's platform, a place where what mattered was what you presented visually rather than who you actually were offline. Sound familiar? And here is the discovery that the 16-year-old Anna Sorkin made about these platforms. A discovery that would become the foundational logic of everything she did for the next decade of her life. Online, identity was not something that you earned through real relationships and verifiable history. Wow, that hasn't changed that much. Online, identity was a curational choice, a visual style, a collection of aesthetic decisions that constituted you regardless of whether they bore any relationship to the offline reality that you've been born into. She did not learn how to connect with people where she was in Eschweiler. She learned how to dress up a character. And I want to be very precise about this clinical observation because, it's my analysis and it's the foundation of everything that comes up and follows this. The Anna Delvey persona, the German heiress who would later defraud banks, hotels, and personal acquaintances of approximately $275,000, did not begin as a calculated criminal strategy. It began as a digital prosthetic, a constructed identity that protected a frozen adolescent nervous system from the unbearable reality of being invisible in a world that had decided invisibility was a kind of social death. The Anna Delvey character started as a shield. The real danger began when she discovered that the world would treat her exactly as she presented herself if she wore the shield convincingly enough in 3 dimensions. Now, there is one more piece of Anna's origin story that's not received the clinical attention that it deserves, I believe. And I want to put it on the record now because it matters for the wound architecture that I'm building here. So bear with me. And you're about to see it operating across her adult life. Her father, Vadim's professional trajectory is itself a story of constructed identity meeting collapse. He started as a truck driver. Through ambition, through effort, he became an executive at a transport company. Then in 2013, when Anna was 22 and beginning her own assault on Manhattan, that company went bankrupt. Vadim lost the executive identity that he built. He started over with a small business focused on heating systems. Now, this has been verified in various biographical details and from multiple sources. And Anna grew up by watching that arc, working class origin to performed executive status to collapse to humble small business reconstruction. The lesson available to her from her father's life was not the lesson he intended for her. Her father's experience taught her that performed status is fragile, that the executive identity that her father had constructed depended on the company that employed him, that when the external structure collapsed, the identity collapsed with it. And that the only way to prevent that collapse was to control every element of the constructed reality yourself, rather than depending on institutional employers to sustain it. She would not work for someone else. She would not let her identity depend on a company that she did not own. She would build her own institution and place herself at the center of it. The Anna Delvey Foundation was not a random business idea. And people tend to talk about it as it was. It was the structural solution to the problem that her father's collapse had taught her existed. Build the institution that contains your identity. Own it completely. Make it impossible for anyone to fire you from being who you are and, who you've decided to be. And I want to address people who may be thinking, well, you can't blame her father for what she did. And that's not what I'm doing. My analysis is not blaming Vadim for his daughter's choices. By all accounts, he's a man who built and rebuilt his professional life through legitimate means, and he continued to support Anna throughout her conviction and her incarceration. What this analysis observes is that Anna grew up inside a very specific family lesson about fragility of institutional identity and the importance of controlling the structure that contains your status. Now, done properly, very smart. But she drew her own conclusion from that lesson. Understanding the origin of a psychological pattern is not the same as assigning blame for its consequences. So that's not what I'm doing. And that is not my analysis. I wanted to let you know that a large percentage of you, 58%, are not subscribed to the channel. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. So Anna graduated from her German school in June of 2011, and she immediately attempted her first major identity transition. She moved to London to study at Central St. Martin's, the prestigious art and design school. She dropped out within a few months and returned to Germany. This is clinically significant. It's a very significant moment that almost no Anna Delvey content that I've explored has explored. Central St. Martin's was Anna's very first attempt to enter a very high-status creative environment through legitimate means. She applied, she was accepted, she enrolled, and then she found herself once again in an environment where her actual identity, quiet Russian girl, working class family, no relevant social capital, could not perform at the level that the institution required. I mean, Central St. Martin's is very well known, highly regarded. The dropout was not academic failure. It was the second time that her nervous system encountered the gap between the identity she needed to inhabit and the identity that her actual history could sustain. The first time was Eschweiler. She solved that with the digital prosthetic. The second time was Central St. Martin's, and this time the digital prosthetic was not enough because the institution required three-dimensional performance that her actual self could not produce. It wasn't there. So she went back to Germany, she regrouped, and when she tried again at the magazine Purple in Paris and then in New York, she did so with a fully constructed alternative identity ready to deploy. She did not enter those next environments as Anna Sorokin, attempting to perform Anna Delvey. She entered them as Anna Delvey from the very first introduction. The character had absorbed the self. Anna worked briefly in Paris at the fashion and art magazine Purple under the name Anna Delvey. Her earnings were minimal, approximately 400 euros per month, according to her own account, and her parents continued to support her financially. So it all takes a turn. In 2013, she went to New York for what was supposed to be a brief trip. Montauk in the summer, Fashion Week in September. She was 22 years old. She made more friends in New York in those few weeks than she'd made in years in Paris. And she decided to stay. You know, this was now becoming the bones of what she loved. She briefly worked at Purple's New York office. And then she quit. And then she began the project that would define the next 4 years of her life and result in her conviction of multiple counts of grand larceny in 2019. Anna began telling people about the Anna Delvey Foundation. In her mind, it was an exclusive private members club and arts foundation, a space for the cultural elite, a vision that would transform New York's social ecosystem, a project that required between $20 and $40 million in initial funding to bring to life. There was one problem. The foundation did not exist. But the moment she began describing it as she did, something extraordinary happened. People believed her. In late 2016 and into 2017, Anna Sorokin took up residence at a minimalist luxury boutique hotel in Soho called 11 Howard. It was not called 11 or 12 George or whatever it was in that documentary. It was 11 Howard, verified by multiple sources. Her room rate was approximately $400 per night. She stayed for 3 to 4 months. By the end of her stay, she'd accumulated approximately $30,000 in charges that eventually she was unable to pay. None of those numbers are the clinically interesting part of this story. It could be $1 million. That's not interesting. The clinically interesting part is the relationship that she built with one specific employee during those months, a concierge named Neff Davis, known to her colleagues and friends as Neff. Neff Davis was working as a concierge at 11 Howard when Anna first arrived. She was approximately the same age as Anna. She was an aspiring filmmaker working a service job to support her creative ambitions. She was, in every meaningful sense, tens of thousands of young creatives in New York do every single day, working a survival job whilst quietly building toward the artistic career that she actually wanted. Now, here is what I want you to notice. Anna identified Neff's specific wound within the very first interaction. The wound was not poverty. Neff was not destitute. She had a job. She was paying her bills, by all accounts, and she was making her way in New York. Not an easy feat. The wound was something more specific. Neff was watching wealthy hotel guests live out their dreams that she wanted for herself, live out the dreams that she wanted for herself. She was the gatekeeper to elite experiences that she herself was structurally excluded from. Every shift she worked confirmed her proximity to a world that she wanted to enter and her exclusion from it. Anna offered the bridge, and she paid the toll in advance. Here is what actually happened when Anna first approached the concierge desk at 11 Howard. She did not introduce herself with a request from a concierge. She asked for a restaurant recommendation. And before Neff had even responded, Anna placed $100 bill on the desk. Now get this, the $100 bill arrived before the service, before the relationship, before any explanation of who Anna was or why she was tipping for a recommendation a concierge would have given for free. Anna did not need the restaurant recommendation. She knew the New York scene pretty well by then. She'd been studying it through the digital prosthetic for years. What she was buying was not information. What she was buying was a relationship. And she was buying it through a payment structure specifically calibrated to override the professional defenses that would normally regulate the boundary between staff, hotel staff, and guests. The professional relationship, the boundary that you do not break. This is what I'm going to call the transactional feedback loop. And I want you to understand exactly how it works, because it's the same mechanism that operates in every toxic workplace dynamic that clients have ever brought to your office, that colleagues bring to your office, that people in high positions bring in to people in lower positions. It usually leads to a boundary break. Here is what consistent, unexpected financial generosity does to the human nervous system. The brain's reward processing system, the part of your neural architecture that learns what's safe and what's dangerous in your environment, runs primarily through a region called the ventral striatum. And so when you encounter unexpected positive reward like that, the ventral striatum releases dopamine. And that dopamine release is not just pleasure, it equates to learning, and the brain is being trained neurochemically to associate the source of the reward with safety, predictability, and beneficial outcomes. Every time that Anna placed a $100 bill on Neff's desk, she was sending a signal directly to Neff's reward processing system. With me, your effort is immediately rewarded. With me, you're safe. With me, the normal calculus of risk and reward that governs your professional life is suspended. This is not a metaphor. This is what was happening at the neurochemical level every time the transaction occurred. And here is what makes it psychologically devastating. In my opinion, the brain does not distinguish between rewards that have been earned and rewards that are being used as manipulation strategy. The neurochemistry is identified either way. By the time Neff had received 50 or 100 of these $100 interactions, her nervous system had been thoroughly conditioned to experience Anna as a source of safety and as a source of unexpected reward. So by the time Anna asked Neff to put a $400 dinner bill on her own credit card with the promise that she would reimburse her later, which is what she did multiple times, Neff's neural architecture had already been restructured to trust Anna at a level that overrode professional judgment. And this is so dangerous. The warning signs were not absent. They were drowned out by a sustained steam, the warning signs were not absent. They were drowned out by a sustained stream of dopaminergic reinforcement. Now, I do want to address some of you who may be thinking, well, Neff was just an opportunist, taking from the rich and taking advantage of her guests. And this framing fundamentally misunderstands what was actually happening between Anna and Neff. Neff was doing her job. The job of a luxury hotel concierge is to provide service to the guests in exchange for tips. That's what the job is. The $100 tip is unusually generous, but it's not corrupt. What made the relationship clinically distinctive was not the money itself, but it was the way the consistent, unexpected generosity restructured Neff's nervous system response to Anna over time. Neff was not exploited because she was greedy. She was captured because she was human. Over the months of Anna's stay at 11 Howard, the relationship deepened from transactional to genuinely personal. Anna would go to the concierge desk during Neff's shifts, and they would talk for hours. Anna would share meals with her. She invited her to expensive restaurants and shopping days where Anna paid for everything. Neff became, in effect, an unpaid an unpaid personal assistant. Anna asked her to schedule meetings, to book restaurants, to arrange transportation, to manage logistics for the elaborate social life that she was constructing in New York. And Anna's $100 tips continued throughout. Neff told the Vanity Fair journalist Jessica Pressler years later that Anna paid for the personal trainer block, $4,500 upfront in cash, when she invited Neff to come along to a training session. So this is the exact same financial generosity that Anna employed. It was a pattern at the concierge desk, scaled up to a different context. The $4,000 or $4,500 purchased something very specific. It purchased Neff's continued presence in Anna's life beyond the hotel. It purchased the friendship that the transactional feedback loop that I mentioned before had been building toward. And here is the most, I would say, clinically interesting piece of this entire dynamic. Anna never directly defrauded Neff. Throughout the years of the friendship, through the eventual collapse of the Anna Delvey persona, through the trial, the conviction, Anna kept her financial promises to Neff specifically. The $100 tips continued. The reimbursements were made. The $4,500 trainer block was paid back in cash up front. Neff was, in Neff's own words in subsequent interviews, the only person Anna paid back in full. Now, I could do a deep dive into that because I believe I know why, but that's not for this video. And if you want me to do it, let me know in the comments. I'll consider it. But I'll give a little bit because I feel like that's unfair for me to tease it and not say anything. So I'll give a bit about why. So why was Neff different? I think to understand why Anna treated Neff differently from her other marks, you have to understand what Neff actually represented in Anna's psychological architecture. Anna's other targets, Rachel, Kacy, the banks, the hotels, were all instruments of her ambition to enter the cultural elite. They were means to the end of becoming who she needed to be. Neff was different. Neff was the only person in Anna's New York life who saw both versions of her simultaneously. Neff worked at the hotel. She knew Anna lived there. She saw the credit cards declining. She watched the wire transfers come in and out. She knew the operational reality of the Anna Delvey lifestyle in a way that the wealthy social acquaintances did not. And Neff stayed. In the constructed identity logic that governed Anna's entire psychology, that loyalty was unprecedented. Neff was witnessing the gap between the Anna Delvey performance and the operational reality of Anna Sorkin. And she was not running. She was not threatening exposure. She was simply choosing to be present to the person, regardless of which version was visible at any given moment. That was, in Anna's emotional economy, the closest thing to genuine human connection she probably ever experienced. So she paid Neff back. She protected the relationship that protected her ability to feel real in a life otherwise organized entirely around performance. And after the conviction, her own credit card for joint expenses, with the promise of immediate reimbursement, Rachel was already too invested in the relationship to refuse without losing the experience the relationship had been providing. Throughout 2016 and 2017, Rachel and Anna's friendship grew in ways, and it deepened in ways that may look just ordinary, like an ordinary close female friendship between two young women in New York City. They saw each other multiple times per week. They traveled together domestically to the Berkshires, to fashion events. Anna paid, Rachel enjoyed. That was the relationship. They confided in each other. Rachel introduced Anna to friends, including the personal trainer, Kacy Duke, who would become the third major figure in the story. They created the appearance of a close-knit social circle of accomplished young women supporting each other's ambitions. And underneath that appearance, the financial dynamic was always operating. Anna paid for everything. Rachel received the experiences without paying for them. The transactional feedback loop continued to do its neurochemical work on Rachel's perception of Anna over months of accumulated reinforcement. So every time it was experienced, it was reinforced. And by the time Anna proposed the trip to Morocco in May 2017, Rachel was not capable of logically evaluating the proposal, as a discrete transaction. She was evaluating it through the lens of long established friendship, in the transactional sense that Anna always paid for everything and had always come through on her financial promises. That's the evidence that she had. That's the promise held, which is precisely why Morocco worked the way it did. I want to touch on the somatic trap and the Morocco fracture. The Morocco trip is in May 2017. Anna Sorokin proposed a trip to Marrakesh, Morocco. She framed it as an expenses paid or all expenses paid luxury holiday. The stated purpose was meant to be twofold. So Anna needed to leave the United States briefly to reset her visa status. And she wanted to shoot promotional video content for the Anna Delvey Foundation at one of Morocco's most photogenic luxury properties. Anna invited 4 people: Rachel, Kacy Duke, who was the celebrity fitness trainer that Rachel introduced her to, a photographer named Jesse Hawk to document the trip, and herself. The destination was La Mamounia, which is a legendary luxury resort in Marrakesh, with room rates of approximately $7,000 per night. Anna did not actually book the flights, Rachel did, on her own credit card, before they had even left New York. That detail is the first clinically visible warning signs, and it tells you that the financial architecture of the trip was already operating in the dynamic that would define the entire experience. Anna's promises were one thing. The operational reality was that Rachel was already paying for things on the assumption that reimbursement would arrive eventually. The reimbursement architecture had worked perfectly fine, had worked perfectly fine in New York for over a year. There was no reason yet for Rachel to suspect that Morocco would be any different, but it would be very different. The group arrived in Marrakesh. They checked into La Mamounia. The first evening, they had dinner together at the resort. And during that dinner, Kacy Duke became very ill, severely ill. She returned to her room and she remained sick in bed through the night. The following morning, she made the decision to leave Morocco entirely and to return to New York. This detail is critical for your understanding of the wound web that I'm building here, because Kacy left before the central financial extraction that defined the rest of the trip. Kacy was not present when Anna's credit card began declining at La Mamounia. Kacy was not present when Rachel was asked to put her credit card down as a hold. Kacy was not present when Rachel ultimately had to charge $62,000 to her personal and business credit cards to cover the trip. Kacy's involvement in Anna's psychological architecture is real and significant, but her central wound was activated through a completely separate incident that happened after she'd already left Morocco. And we'll come to that incident shortly. But what I want you to hold for now is that Anna's three primary marks each experienced different versions of the manipulation. Neff was captured through transactional reinforcement over months. Rachel was captured through Morocco specifically. Kacy was captured through Casablanca, an event that came after Morocco, and it involved entirely different psychological mechanisms. 3 women, 3 wounds, 3 discrete manipulation patterns. 1 Anna. This is the wound web in operation. These are the tentacles that connect them all. Shortly after Kacy left Morocco, the resort staff approached Anna and informed her that they needed an alternate form of payment. Her credit cards were no longer being accepted. The room rate was $7,000 per night, and it was accumulating into figures that her cards could not sustain. She wasn't able to pay in cash. The hotel was not being paid. Anna's response was not panic. It was not flight. It was not the response of someone who'd been caught doing something wrong. Her response was performance. She told Rachel that there was a banking issue, that her cards were temporarily frozen because she had failed to notify her bank about international travel. Well, I mean, that can happen. That the wire transfer she was expecting from her family trust was delayed. We now know there was no trust. That the situation would be resolved within hours or days at the most. And in the meantime, would Rachel mind putting her card down as a temporary hold so they could continue the trip uninterrupted? Rachel agreed. I want to be very direct about something here because the standard true crime framing of this moment is wrong. I believe it's wrong. Rachel was not naive or stupid. She was not greedy. She wasn't naive in any standard sense of the word, I would say. I mean, Rachel was a Vanity Fair editor in a luxury Moroccan resort with a friend she'd known for over a year whose financial generosity had been consistently reliable across dozens of previous interactions. and transactions. The proposal Anna made, temporary credit card hold, banking issue to be resolved within hours, was completely plausible within the existing relationship architecture. And the alternative, refusing to help her friend in what appeared to be a minor administrative inconvenience, would have felt like an absurd overreaction to anyone in Rachel's position with Rachel's history with Anna. Rachel did not make a stupid, ignorant, naive decision. Rachel was never stupid or ignorant or naive. Rachel made the decision that her accumulated experience of Anna had trained her to make. The trap was not in the moment. The trap had been set over the previous year through every Vanity Fair lunch, every spa day, every reimbursed dinner. Morocco was simply the moment that the trap closed. Over the following days at La Mamunia and the subsequent extended stay, Rachel charged approximately $62,000 to her personal and her business credit cards to cover the trip's expenses. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, transport, every expense that the trip's operational reality required. Each time Anna assured her, and each time Anna assured her that the reimbursement was imminent. Each time the banking situation was being resolved. Each time the next day or the next week would see everything restored. Anna stayed in Morocco for an additional week after the initial decline. The trip's planned duration extended into a kind of indefinite occupation of luxury that Rachel was now financing on credit cards she could not possibly afford to clear. One was a company credit card, and then Anna left Morocco. She did not return to New York with Rachel. Instead, she traveled to Casablanca, to the Four Seasons Hotel, where the same credit card pattern repeated itself. Anna was at the Four Seasons in Casablanca when her cards failed again. This time, the person she contacted for help was not Rachel. Rachel had already gone, already back to New York, already starting to face the reality of $62,000 of unsecured debt on her credit card would probably never be repaid. Anna contacted Kacy Duke. Kacy purchased Anna a flight back to the United States, personally, from her own funds. And after Anna returned to New York, Kacy hosted her in her own home. Kacy continued to try to help her. Kacy eventually staged what one source describes as an intervention when Anna's behavior became increasingly difficult to ignore. To understand why Kacy did this, we have to understand who Kacy is and what her specific psychological vulnerability profile actually looks like. Her wound. Kacy Duke is a celebrity fitness trainer and life coach based in New York City. She has celebrity clients and other high-profile figures. She's widely respected in her field. She's built a global brand around her ability to coach, support, to motivate, and to ultimately help her clients to heal. Her professional identity is built on being strong, being reliable, uh, being a maternal figure who shows up for people in crisis, and who puts themselves in a space where someone's vulnerable and she helps put them back together. That identity is also her wound. Every person whose professional identity is built around being the helper develops over time a specific kind of psychological vulnerability. The need to be needed, the dependence on being the one who fixes situations as a source of self-confirmation, the blind spot that comes from a sustained inability to, I would say, recognize that one's own ability, or let's say one's own capacity to help, has limits. Now, this isn't every healer's journey. As healers, people call therapists healers, not everyone subscribes to that. As I've just said, I believe we support people to their own healing. That's very different from healing someone. Kacy first met Anna because Anna sought her out online and she hired her. She paid the $4,500 for that training block up front in cash. The same investment pattern Anna used with Neff. And then over the months of working with Anna, Kacy did something quite specific that's documented in multiple interviews. She took, in her own words, a motherly interest in Anna. That maternal framing is the clinical signal you need to understand the Casablanca rescue. So Anna did not appear to Kacy as a financial opportunity or glamorous friend. Anna appeared to Kacy as a young woman who needed help. The Casablanca phone call did not activate Kacy's banking judgment. It activated Kacy's maternal identity. And here is the empathy weapon mechanism in its most precise form. The more empathetic a person is, the more vulnerable they are to a manipulation that presents itself as a request for help from someone in apparent distress. The empathetic person's nervous system goes into a state of compassionate urgency. My last video was about compassion fatigue. Go and watch that if you haven't seen it. But the desire to relieve the distressed person's suffering becomes overriding. The normal evaluative frameworks that we would normally employ that would assess whether the help is appropriate or temporarily suspended is lacking. So Anna did not exploit Kacy despite Kacy's empathy. Anna exploited Kacy specifically because of Kacy's empathy. The very thing that made Kacy professionally exceptional made her psychologically targeted. Now, I want to stop just briefly here to talk to anyone out there who is watching this video now and thinking that it sounds very, very familiar. If you've ever been the empathetic person in a toxic workplace, you show humanity, compassion, concern. You know what I'm describing here. The leader who identified you as the one who would handle the difficult colleagues. The manager who came to you with all their personal problems that you don't want to know about. They're burdening you with their personal problems. The executive who confided in you about issues they would not raise with anyone else. That's a burden. The pattern of being chosen repeatedly to absorb the emotional labor of an organization that had no other mechanism for processing what it was doing to the people inside of it. You probably thought for a very long time that being chosen this way was a compliment. Oh, they trust you. They know you can deal with things. They may even force you to have to deal with someone who's clearly incompetent. A recognition of your particular emotional intelligence. You may even think that this is a recognition of your particular emotional intelligence. A signal that you're seen as capable, mature, trustworthy. It's not a compliment. It was a diagnosis. The system around you had identified that you were the person whose empathy could be deployed to absorb the harm that would otherwise have been surfaced as organizational dysfunction. Your capacity to care was being used to prevent the system from having to change, to own up to their failures, to admit that they are culturally toxic. This is the empathy weapon operating at organizational scale. And the cost to the empathetic person is not just exhaustion, though it is that, but the cost is the slow restructuring of one's own identity around a function that the system requires rather than a vocation that the person actually chose. By the time the empathetic person recognizes what's been happening, they've often lost touch with what they wanted before they became the helper, the empathetic one. That is what Anna did to Kacy on a single trip. It was what toxic workplaces do to empathetic employees over years. Same mechanism, different scale. If anything that I've just described is resonating from your own working life, the empathy weapon, the way being chosen as the helper restructured something inside of you. And if what I'm describing is landing in your own working life, the Behind the Toxic Workplace community is where I work with people at exactly this stage. There are 11 modules, video modules. I do a live call every month, structured worksheets, a community of peers who are supporting, helping to navigate versions of what we've just discussed. So visit the link in the description to find out more. Anna's house of cards came apart through 2017 into 2018. The hotels that she'd been residing at began refusing further charges and pursuing payment. 11 Howard, the W downtown, Beekman. Each one ended the same way, with Anna asked to leave and unpaid bills accumulating. The banks that she'd been attempting to defraud for the Anna Delvey Foundation funding, Fortress, City National, and others, had begun to investigate. The fraudulent documents she'd submitted in support of her loan applications were being scrutinized. The trust fund that did not exist was being looked into. Rachel had been trying for months to get her $62,000 back. She had received approximately $5,000 in a PayPal transfer. The rest had not arrived and was clearly not going to arrive. In October 2017, Rachel cooperated with the New York Police Department in a sting operation that resulted in Anna's arrest. Anna was indicted on multiple counts of grand larceny and theft of services. The trial began in March 2019, and it concluded with her conviction on 8 counts in April 2019, and her sentencing to 4 to 12 years in state prison on the 9th of May in that year. She was also fined $24,000 and ordered to pay $199,000 in restitution. The collapse was complete, but the performance was not over. The performance was in many ways just entering its most clinically revealing phase. Anna Sorkin's trial in 2019 became famous for something that had nothing to do with the legal proceedings themselves. It became famous for what she wore. Her legal team hired a celebrity stylist to dress her. And on her first day of the trial, Anna arrived from Rikers Island in her prison uniform. Her legal team had to send an associate to H&M to spend approximately $200 on something that did not, in the legal team's words, scream inmate. Anna eventually appeared in court that day wearing a black blazer over a beige jumper, black capris, and white trainers. Her team had also tried to provide her with pointy stiletto heels, but the Department of Correction denied the footwear, citing safety concerns. From that emergency H&M intervention, the courtroom became a runway. Many designer outfits were worn, and on one documented occasion, she refused to enter the courtroom because the outfit she'd been provided was not up to her standards. This caused delays in the legal proceedings. Her attorney defended these decisions to GQ magazine in an email that is, for our purposes, the most clinically revealing piece of evidence in this entire trial sequence. Here is what her attorney wrote about why his client needed a stylist. Quote, "It is imperative that Anna dress appropriately for the trial. Anna's style was a driving force in her business and life, and it is a part of who she is." Close quote. If you look at that statement again carefully, her style is a part of who she is. This is not a stylist saying this. This is not a fashion magazine saying this. This is Anna's defense attorney saying this in a professional communication with a journalist during the trial that would determine whether his client spent up to 12 years in prison. Her attorney's legal strategy explicitly required acknowledging to the press in writing that his client's identity was constituted by her aesthetic presentation, that the fashion was not vanity, that the courtroom outfits were not theatrical choices made for jury influence. They were, in the legal team's own framing, intrinsic to the person they were defending. This is the clinical observation made by Anna's own legal counsel. Anna's identity is her style, not expressed through her style, constituted by it. And once you understand that, the courtroom fashion stops being absurd and becomes precisely what we should expect. Anna was on trial for fraud, but the deeper threat the trial posed to her was not legal, it was existential. The trial was the institutional attempt to strip away the Anna Delvey character and expose the ordinary Russian girl underneath. The trial was the world finally saying, "We have decided you are not who you say you are." And Anna's response was to perform the Anna Delvey identity more completely than she'd ever had before. The courtroom outfits were not vanity. They were an existential defense. In the clinical literature, there was a very specific concept for what Anna was doing in that courtroom. And it's called narcissistic defense. Now, people get very antsy when I talk about narcissism, but I want to reassure you, I am using this from a clinical view. The set of psychological mechanisms a person with significant narcissistic structure deploys when their core identity is threatened with exposure as ordinary, flawed, or fundamentally inadequate. And this aesthetic mastery is one of the most common forms that this defense takes. And here's why. The narcissistic structure is built around the avoidance of a specific feeling, the feeling of being ordinary, of being seen accurately, of being known in one's actual rather than performed dimensions. When that feeling threatens to surface, when the world begins to see through the performance, the narcissistic system responds by intensifying the performance rather than allowing the threat to land. Anna, in that courtroom, was experiencing the most direct possible threat to her constructed identity. The state of New York was attempting, in front of a jury, to establish that she was a working-class Russian girl who had committed fraud. Not an heiress, not a visionary, not a cultural figure, just an ordinary criminal. The nervous system could not tolerate that exposure. The narcissistic structure required the intensification of the performance to prevent the threatened feeling from surfacing. So she dressed in Saint Laurent. She wore other designers. She refused to enter the courtroom until the outfit was acceptable. She turned the trial that was trying to expose her ordinariness into the most photographed runway of her career. And here is the clinical observation that makes this section connect to everything, to your lived experience, actually. The narcissistic shield mechanism that Anna deployed in that courtroom is the same mechanism that toxic leaders deploy when they're exposed in workplace settings. Watch what happens the next time a leader in a toxic organization is confronted with evidence that they have failed at something fundamental, like calling out an incompetent colleague rather than making excuses for them. Watch the doubling down. Watch the intensification of the performance of authority. Watch the increased aggression toward whoever raised the concern. Watch the absolute refusal to acknowledge that the exposure has happened. That is the narcissistic shield operating at the workplace scale. A lot of you are living inside. Anna's courtroom outfits made the mechanism photographable. The same mechanism is invisible in most workplaces because it does not produce designer clothing. It produces meetings, emails, proposals, performance reviews, and the systematic punishment of anyone who tried to name the gap between the leader's performance and the leader's real capacity, which will be minimal. Same shield, different materials. Now, some of you may be saying, well, plenty of people care about their appearance. They want to dress well. They want to look well. Why shouldn't she look well in court? Why shouldn't she dress up in court? Yes, absolutely. Plenty of women dress well and do not refuse to enter courtrooms over outfit standards during their criminal trial. The clinical observation here is not about Anna wearing nice clothes. It's about a documented pattern in which her aesthetic performance intensified specifically at the moments that her identity was most directly threatened by institutional exposure. That intensification is the clinical signal. The clothes themselves are the evidence, and they are not the analysis. And the analysis applies identically to male narcissistic leaders whose defense shields take different aesthetic forms. So the shield is universal. Its specific decorative content, how it looks, varies by gender, by culture, by context. Now, we can finally see the architecture that's been operating underneath this entire story. If you've stayed with me, I've explained it thoroughly. Anna Delvey did not exploit random victims. She targeted women who were running the same psychological program that she was running. Each of them was living in a state of professional and social liminality, the painful threshold between who they were and who they desperately wanted to become. Anna's wound was the fractured identity identified in Eschweiler, the shame of being ordinary, invisible, and unremarkable in a culture that had decided that ordinariness was social death. Her response was to construct a counterfeit, untouchable persona that the world would treat as nobility. Neff's wound was a stifled creative ambition trapped behind a concierge desk. A brilliant, aspiring filmmaker watching wealthy guests live out their dreams, the same dreams that she wanted. Hunger for access, hunger for recognition, and to be out of obscurity. Rachel's wound was the legacy imposter syndrome of being surrounded by elite wealth on a magazine editor's salary. The daily disconnect between her glamorous working environment and her actual financial reality. The vulnerability to anyone who could close that gap, which Anna did. Kacy's wound was the savior identity, built on being the strong, reliable healer for elite clients. The need to be needed that left her exposed to anyone capable of performing the role of the broken bird who required rescue. Each wound was different in its specific content, but each wound was identical in its underlying structure. Each of these women, like Anna herself, was actively trying to outrun an earlier version of themselves and reach a different identity on the other side of their current liminal state. Anna recognized them because she was them. The only difference was the line that she was willing to cross to escape the liminality. Anna's true genius was not financial. It was something else entirely. She looked at each woman around her, whether she realized it or not, and diagnosed their specific hunger in seconds and reflected it back at them so precisely that what they saw in her was not Anna at all. It was themselves, the version of themselves that they were most desperate to become. Neff was a friend who took her creative ambitions seriously, she did, and was willing to fund the path that her concierge salary could not. The version of Neff who was not just a hotel worker, but an aspiring filmmaker with a wealthy patron who believed in her work. That's intoxicating. Rachel saw a friend who closed the gap between her glamorous environment and her real life. The version of Rachel who finally belonged in the world she worked inside. Who could order from any menu without checking the price. Kacy saw a younger woman who needed her wisdom and her care. The version of Kacy who was not just a fitness trainer to celebrities, but a mentor whose maternal influence shaped a young person's life. The healer, fulfilling her healer identity through someone who genuinely needed healing. Each of them saw themselves in Anna. And that was the trap. Because leaving Anna meant admitting that the reinvention they had each staked their own identity on might also be performance rather than reality. If Anna's performed wealth was constructed, what did that mean for Rachel's performed belonging in the Vanity Fair world? If Anna's promised Hollywood connections were fake, what did that mean for Neff's belief that she was almost ready for her breakthrough? If Anna's apparent need for savior wisdom was manipulation, what did that mean for Kacy's identity as the healer whose presence transformed lives? They could not leave Anna without questioning their own constructed identities. So they stayed until they could not stay. Here is the most clinically devastating observation in this episode. Anna Delvey promised each woman the thing their specific wound most needed. She failed to deliver any of it through the means that she claimed. She went to prison instead. And then, through the wreckage of the collapsed con, every single woman received exactly what Anna originally promised them. Neff wanted a Hollywood break. She got one. She consulted on the Netflix production, Inventing Anna. Rachel wanted to bridge the gap between her glamorous environment and her actual bank account. Simon & Schuster paid her $300,000 for the book deal. my friend Anna. And HBO paid her $35,000 for a project with potential for an additional $300,000 if the project is produced. Her credit card companies forgave her remaining charges. My friend Anna became a New York Times bestseller. Kacy wanted global recognition as a luxury authority and moral survivor. She consulted on inventing Anna. She trained different celebrities. She elevated her global profile substantially through the cultural moment that Anna's story created. Anna kept her promises, just not the way she said she would. She did not deliver Hollywood connections through the Anna Delvey Foundation. She delivered Hollywood connections through being the criminal subject of a Netflix series. She did not provide Rachel with financial liberation through a wealthy heiress friendship. She provided Rachel with a publishing career through being the antagonist of Rachel's best-selling book. She did not elevate Kacy through endorsing her training services to elite networks. She elevated Kacy through becoming the cautionary tale Kacy could publicly survive. The con artist who failed at her own reinvention inadvertently completed the reinventions of the women she tried to exploit. There is one more observation about the countercon resolution that almost no Anna Delvey content has explored, that I've seen anyway. And it's the detail that proves the wound web continued operating even after Anna's departure. Kacy Duke has expressed publicly that she felt mixed about Rachel's countercon. In a conversation with Entertainment Tonight, Kacy said she wished Rachel had been more honest with her about the book deal and the HBO deal. The implication was clear. Rachel and Kacy did not unite in solidarity after Anna's collapse. Each woman managed her own recovery and her own monetization. And in doing so, each of them sometimes did so at the expense of the relationship with the others. This is clinically important because it tells us that the wound web Anna constructed did not disappear when Anna went to prison. The dynamics Anna activated in each woman, the reinventive ambition, the fear of obscurity, the urgent need to convert the experience into professional capital, continued operating after she was gone. Each woman pursued the version of reinvention her specific wound required. And the relationships between them, which had been forged in the heat of the shared experience, trauma bonding, frayed under the pressure of each woman's individual scramble to capitalize on it. The con artist left. The con artist's psychological architecture remained. This is the most precise version of your workplace mirror in my episode here. So when the toxic leader is finally removed from an organization or a toxic colleague, the dysfunction does not disappear. They were there for a reason. And if they were there for a long time, The patterns the leader installed in the people they exploited continue to operate. The colleagues who survive together do not necessarily emerge as allies either. They emerge as individuals who each developed their own adaptive strategies under the leader's pressure. And those strategies having been forged in toxicity often continue producing fractures in the relationships that should have been the recovery community. Removing the leader is necessary, or removing the toxic colleague is necessary, but it's not sufficient. The work of recovery has to be done individually and collectively long after the leader is gone. In April 2026, Anna Delvey posted a video to her 1.1 million Instagram followers showing herself putting designer tights over her ankle monitor. Her bio describes her as an unproblematic comedian. She's been on Dancing with the Stars. She's posed for Playboy France. She's been featured in Artful Living. She has a company, although I can't see that it's a company, but she has an email that says The Nothing Company. It's breathtakingly accurate. The Anna Delvey persona that began at 16, the digital prosthetic, has outlived the criminal enterprise it was originally constructed to fund. The con failed, but the brand it created did not. Anna told the journalist, Jessica Pressler, something during the original reporting that I want to read to you now because it tells you exactly how Anna understands her own situation. Quote, money, like there's an unlimited amount of capital in the world, you know, but there's limited amounts of people who are talented. Close quote. She has inverted the standard relationship between money and talent. In her formulation, money is abundant. The scarce resource is talent. And talent has the right to access the abundant resource because the abundant resource exists for the rare resource to use. She has placed herself inside the talented category. And given her monetization through Instagram, Playboy, Dancing with the Stars, and The Nothing Company, which is brilliant, given that she has successfully converted her own criminal conviction into a sustained income stream that supports a continued performance of the lifestyle that she originally went to prison for trying to acquire, she is right in one very specific and very limited sense. She has demonstrated a talent. Not the talent that she claims to have, not the talent that would have produced the Anna Delvey Foundation, not the talent that has built genuine companies for figures like Paris Hilton, the cultural template that Anna was originally trying to inhabit. Anna has demonstrated the specific contemporary skill of converting one's own controversial existence into a continuous content stream that the attention economy will reward indefinitely. That is a real talent. Millions are trying to do it right now. It requires the original controversy. That is a real talent. It is also a parasitic one. It requires the original controversy to remain culturally interesting. It cannot transition into building actual things because that would require operational work that Anna has structurally avoided her entire life. And it remains permanently dependent on the audience's continual willingness to find her interesting. Anna's father said something about her in interviews that's gone largely unnoticed in the broader cultural conversation about his daughter, and he said she always wanted to live like Paris Hilton. That single observation tells you everything about the wound that produced Anna, and everything about the wound has not been resolved by her current monetization. Anna wanted to be Paris Hilton, but Paris Hilton built things. Paris Hilton, after the early career of pure visibility, did the actual operational work of building businesses, the perfume empire, the DJ career, the multiple legitimate companies that exist and function and generate revenue, and the hundreds of millions of dollars earned through actual sustained business activity. More importantly, Paris Hilton did the psychological work of integrating her own difficult history into her public identity. She's spoken openly about her experiences at that school. She's used her platform to advocate for reform of the troubled teen industry and what can happen in places like that. Paris Hilton has reckoned with her own story rather than performing past it. Paris Hilton has crossed the threshold. The 2026 Paris Hilton is not the 2003 Paris Hilton. She has become someone who has integrated her past into her present and built a future on that foundation. Anna Delvey has not crossed her threshold. In 2026, Anna is still performing the same identity construction that she was performing in 2017. The aesthetic shield, the designer clothing, the dismissive self-mockery, the unproblematic comedian label that refuses to acknowledge the actual harm that she caused. Paris reinvented herself by integrating her past. Anna remains in permanent, liminal performance by refusing to integrate her past. And here is my closing observation that brings everything together. Anna Delvey wanted to escape the wound of being ordinary. That's my analysis. Through the digital prosthetic, through the constructed identity, through the fraudulent foundation, through the Marrakesh performance, through the courtroom runway, through the post-prison brand, through Nothing Company, through 1.1 million Instagram followers and the Playboy France and the ankle monitor that has become content. She succeeded in becoming famous. She did not succeed in becoming what she actually wanted to be. She wanted to be exceptional. She has become notorious. They are two very different things. She wanted to build an institution. She has become a brand. She wanted to be respected by the cultural elite. She has been monetized by the attention economy. She wanted to escape ordinariness. She has made ordinariness profitable whilst remaining in every measurable internal dimension exactly the person that she was running from when she was 16 years old. That is my closing observation. Anna's wound is not the wound of being abused. Anna's wound is the wound of being unremarkable in a culture that taught her unremarkable was a kind of death. And the culture that taught her that lesson is now rewarding her for having taken the lesson further than anyone else was willing to take it. Anna is not the failure of contemporary culture. Anna is the success of contemporary culture taken to its extreme conclusion. That is why 1.1 million people follow her. That is why she keeps generating new income. That is why the story does not end. She is the version of all of us that we are quietly negotiating with every time we curate our online presence, perform our professional identities, network with aspirational acquaintances, or buy things on credit to maintain the appearance of having arrived. You see, the line between Anna Delvey and you, us, is thinner than you've ever allowed yourself to admit. But she crossed it. You have not yet. Everything that I've shown you today about Anna Delvey lives in your lives, in your working lives, perhaps at home, throughout your families, in versions that you've probably been ignoring for years. The leader who performed wealth and authority and intelligence, but did not actually possess. The colleague who diagnosed your specific professional hunger and reflected it back at you until you could not see them clearly. The boss whose courtroom shield was deployed every time they were challenged on operational reality. The overperforming colleague where you can see something underneath is driving them and it's very dark. The system that took your empathy and weaponized it against your own survival. These are not Anna Delvey on a scale of $275,000. They are Anna Delvey on a scale of your daily working life. And the psychological mechanisms are identical. And once you can see the architecture of what you were inside it, and once you can see the architecture of what you were inside, it becomes much harder for anyone to convince you that what you know is not what you know. That is what this episode was for. And this is what group dynamics and forensic psychology reveal about workplaces, about operational organizations who build toxic work cultures, how they operate in high dysfunction systems, whether they're penthouses in Marrakesh or workplace you walked into this morning. And understanding them changes everything. For those of you who've just watched 90 minutes of my forensic analysis and you've recognized your own situation in what I've described, the inner shift is the application-based program that I've built specifically for professionals ready to dive in and ready to know how and why you're remaining in a toxic workplace environment. It's clinically sound. An application is required. Places are limited. And if you want to go deeper into the hidden dynamics of high-performing, high-dysfunctional groups, the next video on screen is for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you there.